Hi, Chair Professor Nancy Soderberg. Wanting to do a quick review of the final. Basically, it's cumulative throughout the course of the semester, so if you've had trouble with any concepts, reach out. Happy to go over it. We've got some time before the final is due, so please reach out if you can. The format will be the same as it was for the midterm. You'll have some multiple choice on the last module, in this case, Module 5, the mints and the bricks, and current affairs. And the rest is trying to get the key concepts of the modern era and how it applies to today. So we're going to have a bunch of short definitions again. So define the term and make sure that you can apply it to today's crises. So if it says illiberal democracies and China's not a liberal democracy. So start out with that. But you want to define the term, how it would apply. So containment and terrorism, containment and non-proliferation, containment and climate change. Define containment as the Cold War doctrine that was using slow, vigilant policies to contain the Soviet Union and how that applies to today in the tools that we use to contain terrorism, non-proliferation, and be specific about current U.S. policies. And then we'll have a number of essays on looking at these problems and these theories and how they apply to today. And what I'm looking for on the essays is that you understand what's happening in the world. You don't have to understand every country. So when you're looking at the BRICS and the mints or Latin America and Africa, you don't have to know every issue, but have one or two per continent. So as I was saying, you want to know enough about a couple of the BRICS, a couple of the mints, some Latin American countries, some Middle East countries, some Asia, Africa. Take a country in each of those areas that you can speak with authoritatively. You know the president of the country, the rough amount of population there, generally the U.S. relationship with them. Are they a member of the P5 at the United Nations? Are they a nuclear power? And do we have tensions with them? Do we have sanctions on them? Are they a good democracy? Are they in a liberal democracy? Those kind of very broad questions so that you can know how to talk about that one country authoritatively and how it might fit into the concept. You should go back through and study the PowerPoints, the video presentations, glance through the books. There's not going to be any multiple choice on the readings this time. Just the multiple choice is only mints, bricks, and current affairs. And the rest are the concepts. And think about the world and what it means to you. The purpose of this class is to get you to understand the role of the lone superpower in the world. And yes, we are still the lone superpower. And what role should the United States play? Why should you care? How are these issues going to affect you now and in the future? We live in a global economy, so what happens around the world affects you. And if you have a business and a website, you have a global business. So think that way. Try and get out and look at the world and do internships. I'm happy, even when you're long gone after this class, to reach out if you want to do internships now or later. More than happy to help you figure that out. So let me just take a couple of minutes to go through what I would recommend that you review. On the superpower myth, know what the superpower myth is and the fact that the world needs U.S. leadership to coalesce around global solutions to global challenges. And the myth is that we are a superpower, so we don't need the rest of the world. And that's because climate change, we can't do it on our own. Non-proliferation, we can't do it on our own. The global water crisis, food, disease, all of that, we need the rest of the world to do us. And if the U.S. leads, we are more powerful in getting others to follow us. The Introducing Global Issues book is just simply what's happening on the world and the broad trends. And then the specific readings, again, Kennan is the author of The Containment Doctrine, the slow, vigilant policy to contain the Soviet Union. Lasted throughout the Cold War, 42 years longer than expected, but we still use that slow, vigilant containment policy on today's threats. So know a little bit about non-proliferation, the disease, the climate change, any kind of global threat that you would like to write about. End of history under Fukuyama. Again, it isn't that things stopped happening and history was over, but more that the grand ideological battles were over and democracy won. So no longer will socialism or communism or Nazism have a global context in the terms of billions of people following them. Now, some criticize him. He didn't see the clash with Islam coming. He would argue, I did, but it's even today not of global significance in terms of getting billions of people to follow. There's maybe 30,000 in these organizations, another 100,000 followers out of 8 billion people almost. That's not a global. There is an amendment to this when we posted up the Kagan article in one of the modules that authoritarianism is actually coming up to the forefront. You should be able to talk about that authoritatively, and that illiberal democracies are creating authoritarian governments, and that means that the checks and balances, usually the press, the courts, the parliaments, the Congress, are not as strong, and the presidency or the prime ministership, the head of the country, is amassing more power than the balances of a liberal, meaning not left or right, but free constitution would arise. So you've got Hungary, Poland, Russia, Philippines, lots of countries around the world, Bolsonaro in South America, all sort of these strong men, they're all men, coming to power in a way that's undemocratic. So be able to write about that. Know generally the history of the United Nations, what it's good and what it's not good at, which is where the P5 disagreed, can't do it, one of the P5 will veto it. So any internal affairs on Chechnya or human rights in China, frankly, we would veto things that would meddle in our own country. And the difference between the Soviet Union and the difference between the League of Nations and the United Nations is the United Nations gives the P5 veto power, and it's not consensus, and so we have much more control over it. The UN is really good at education, peacekeeping, 120,000 peacekeepers around the globe. It's good at education, negotiating peace. It did a lot with the Iran nuclear agreement. What it's not good at is terrorism. The P5 don't agree with that, fighting a war. And again, anything that gets into the internal affairs of the P5. Article 5 of the NATO Charter has been invoked once. After 9/11, it's the attack on one is an attack on all. And also know about the global challenges. Water, there's a water crisis going on. There's still a billion people around the world that don't have access to basic lives. Diseases still matter, and the Sustainable Development Goals really have an answer to all of those problems. So you want to have a general sense of what the Sustainable Development Goals are. And largely they focus on women, education, and health needs of the family, because if those are solid, then the rest of the society moves forward. Know who the P5 are. It's US, UK, Britain, France, and China. Sorry, Russia, China, France, US, UK. There's 11 other elected members excuse me, on the Security Council. And the UN is based on the concept of sovereignty, in that you don't have the right to interfere in the internal affair of any country. There's 2 exceptions on the use of force prohibition. If you are attacked, you need it for self-defense, or if an issue crosses borders and becomes an international threat to security. There's one new kind of doctrine that has emerged that threatens the issue of sovereignty, and that's the responsibility to protect, R2P, which says that if a state is unwilling or unable to fulfill its responsibility to protect its people. In other words, number one, it's the state's responsibility to protect its people. If it's unable or unwilling to do so, the responsibility falls to the international community. But from there, it's very undefined and has been applied very unevenly. It was applied in the case of Benghazi and Libya. We went in to protect the people of Benghazi, but then the whole country fell apart, and many, many people have died. So it's a very controversial issue. The issue of nonproliferation, you should understand what the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty does, the deal at the heart of that, which is that the P5 keep their weapons legally but eventually get rid of them, which is kind of what we're doing, but no date yet, and that the rest of the world gives up its nuclear weapons in exchange for civilian technology, nuclear power plants, and inspections. Most countries have signed it. The ones that have not are Israel, Pakistan, and India. North Korea did sign it, pulled out. Iran, believe it or not, is still in the NPT. It's been caught violating and cheating it. We had sanctions run by the UN. Once the United States pulled out of the deal, it's beginning to unravel, and the Iranians are beginning to ramp up their nuclear program, so the UN's back in, and sanctions are likely to come back to some extent. Understand the Bretton Woods system, what the IMF and the World Bank do, and then the hard, soft, and smart power. Hard is military, economic sanctions. Soft is trying to convince people to do what you want, countries to do what you want through persuasion. So it's diplomacy, humanitarian aid to help people on the ground. It's Voice of America radio communications, Peace Corps, student exchanges, heads of state exchanges. Smart power is simply a combination of both. So if you are asked to provide two examples of soft power, you mean one that has some hard and some soft, and then the second would be, again, some hard and some smart. Clearly label both of them. You should know the general acronyms: G20, G8, G7, NATO, AU, EU. What the difference between a terrorist and a freedom fighter is, it's simply that the difference of opinion is in the eye of the beholder. Both use military tactics against civilian and military targets. Both believe in a cause. And it's just a question of whether, from your perspective, you believe that cause is just. No, Tom Friedman's The World is Flat. In other words, everyone has the same information, so you're competing for jobs against people from India and China who have the same access to information that you do. The rise of the rest is simply that all boats are rising. It's not a zero-sum game, so the United States can benefit from growing economies as well. And generally a sense of trade, what is good and bad about trade, protectionism. And then the kind of key crises of today: how many refugees are out there? 70 million, enough of bigger than some countries. The gist of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, climate changes, and kind of the general wars that we have, Iraq, Afghanistan, and what the status of our conflicts with Iran and North Korea are. And essentially, I just want you to be able to write essays coherently about these, drawing on some real facts. Don't wing it and make it up. Don't make it longer than it needs to be. I'll know pretty quickly whether you know it or don't. So just apply the concepts, understand and define the concepts, apply them to today, and understand what was right or wrong in your own opinion about these theories and how they would be applied to today. You should be able to argue both sides. There's no right or wrong here. And then lastly, I'll make a final pitch for internships. We have lots of funding and mentoring to go work in the State Department, in the Pentagon, the CIA. You can do them locally. You can do them in Tallahassee. You can do them internationally. We have money. We have about 80 students from UNF that have been in my classes and are now working up there all across the U.S. government. They're there to help and mentor you. So do reach out. Happy to text me anytime, email me, come by office hours. I love mentoring students and would love to have you part of the UNF Osprey community that has fabulous internships. And stay up on the world. It's your world and it matters. And reach out to me even if it's years from now and you want to talk about internships or anything in this class. And please tell me how I could do better, what worked, what didn't, because I want to make sure that I improve for the next semester. You can always do better. And I would love to get to know more of you, so reach out. And thanks so much for a great semester.